Okay. All right, so let's try again and see if the echo stops. All right, here we are. Let's move this. Can I move this screen down? No. All right. So we're going to be talking about human inquiry, which is investigating, doing research, and detective work. So when you ask questions and try to find answers, that's inquiry, right? So we're looking at human inquiry and scientific inquiry and making some comparisons. And the focus of the inquiry that we're doing is on communication. So I want to tell you a story first. And I want to picture yourself at a fancy party where there's somebody walking around offering you the snacks on a tray. And you see this really tasty looking snack. It's something deep fried. You love deep fried stuff. And you eat one and it's delicious. And it's so good that you keep going back for more. You're following the person around, getting these snacks. And then finally you go up to the host and say, oh my goodness, those were the best snacks that I've had in years. What I need the recipe. Can you tell me how to make these? And the person said, oh, yeah, they're deep fried worms. So suddenly, from loving that snack, you go to actually vomiting on the host floor. All right. So what I want to do now is stop and ask you, why do you think you went from totally loving it to throwing up over this food? And by the way, I got this story from our textbook. So our textbook has some really good examples, and I love this story. So what do you think? Let's see. Can you write in the chat why you think that the people went from loving to disgusting? What do you think? Write in the chat. What do you think? Does anyone have any ideas how it went from loving it to throwing up over it? No ideas? Because worms are gross. Okay. All right. Other ideas? Okay. So the perceived notion that works were disgusting. With that new information, they were shocked. Okay. Okay. The social norm to be disgusted of eating bugs in America. Very good. Okay. So it's worms. So very good. Okay. So you're all correct. You're all correct. And I'm going to bring back the presentation here for you. Okay. So in the United States, we don't eat worms, right? So we learned that they're disgusting, but there are people in the world that eat them. The Maori people in New Zealand eat them. The people in the Fujian and Guangdong provinces of China eat them, and people in Venezuela. There's some native peoples in Venezuela that eat them. Okay, so I'm going to show you. And here's some people eating worms I think this is in China. Okay. So let's see if we can, this is an article. I'm not going to show you this article, but you can look up this article and see it, that talks about different people that are eating worms in the world. Okay. And worms are actually a very good source of nutrition. They're high in protein, 60 to 70%. Low in fat, 5 to 11%, carbs, 5 to 21%. So you could actually get all your nutrients from eating a worm, all three, right? And then they also have calcium, iron, copper, magnesium, so lots of minerals, and also a lot of vitamins and niacin, which is a really important niacin. And the proteins have amino acids that are very good. So it has lysine and methionine, and it's and they have essential fatty acids in it. Okay, but we don't eat them, and so we find them disgusting, and our body rejects them, right? So how do we know what we know? Okay, so one of the ways that we know is through agreement. So that example that I just gave you is an example of agreement. We've agreed in the United States and some other cultures that worms are disgusting and we shouldn't eat them. In fact, in the textbook, it talks about how you may have had your parents pull a worm out of your mouth when you were a little kid and you were playing in the dirt. And I know when I was a little kid, we used to pick up worms. So, but your parents told you don't do that, right? And they said it was disgusting. So you learned. So our society agrees that we shouldn't eat worms. And that's why the reaction is so strong, because that agreement is so strong. It's such a strong belief in us. Okay. So that's one thing. Now, we also learn things from direct observation. So now that that person has thrown up, that's going to reinforce the belief, because they observed that eating it made them sick. Now, I'm going to ask you, what do you see here? So just call out. What do you think you got? What are these?
Chicken nuggets.
Okay, very good. Chicken nuggets. Do you think these are healthy?
No,
No? Okay. Why not?
because they're fried.
Because of what?
Are they fried?
They're fried. Okay, so some people try to stay away from fried food. That in and of itself, right? It could be a reason to not eat them. So I'm going to show you something else. And here, whoops. I have to move things around. It's a little bit awkward on Zoom here. So here we go. So here's a little report. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but of what's actually in chicken nuggets.
Have revealed that chicken nuggets are less than 50% actual chicken meat. Of course, I'm not talking about the breading
50%.
itself, but what's actually inside the breading. Researchers at the University of Mississippi, they conducted a test on chicken nuggets from 2 separate national chains. They didn't say which fast food chains they were, but you can only guess what is available in Jackson, Mississippi. So what they did is they selected a nugget from each box, preserved and dissected this and strained the nuggets and looked at them under a microscope. They found that less than 50% of the meat was striated muscle, which is meat, chicken breast meat. The rest of it was a mixture of fat, blood vessels, nerves, cells that were consistent with being the skin, bones, cartilage, stuff that should not be considered meat. And this is a little, well, we knew for a while about the pink mush, the pink slime. Yeah, it looks like delicious strawberry frozen yogurt, but it is really a mismatch of animals and their parts. And this is kind of disturbing. Some people.
Okay, so let's go back to our. Whoops, I need to go back to the. There we go. Okay, right. So this stuff is not very nutritious, like you said. First of all, it's deep fried, but once you get past that, even if you peeled all of the exterior of the deep fried material off of it, the inside of it, it's not really meat. But did it look like meat?
No, that was disgusting.
Right, but when you saw the video, it didn't. It
No.
normally look like meat before they cook it, right? But when you just cut open a cooked chicken nugget, doesn't it look like white meat chicken?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason I showed you that is because looks can be deceiving, and they're counting on that. They're counting on it. So why do you think that these companies that make them put in all these other ingredients instead of just putting in chicken breast, which it's made to look like? Why do you think they do that? Let's see. It's cheaper. It's cheaper. Therefore, the profits are much higher, right? So yeah, they're making more money, but what you observe is it looks white, and it looks like meat when you see it. Okay, so so looks can be deceiving. So that's what I'm showing you, that because observation, although observation is a way that we try to understand the world and see the world, that sometimes what you see isn't what you get, right? And also there's ways that things can be, oh, there we go. So So it looks like white meat chicken. It actually looks like chicken breast. And I used to eat them before I learned this stuff, right? But it's not right. So we understand the world through observation, but sometimes observation doesn't show us everything there is to know about a situation. Okay. So all right. So these are two major ways of knowing when you don't do research, right? Is what you've learned, that we agree to it, that it's true. And then we observe things for ourselves and we make decisions based on that. But what I just showed you is that there can be problems with the ordinary ways of knowing. Okay. So we do want to understand the world and we want to predict what's going to happen, right? So what are some situations? Let's top let's do this here a little bit. So what are some situations, some communication situations? So this could be work, dating, family, school. What are some things that you like to understand and that you like to try to predict? Okay, so just go ahead and type in some things that you think that you like to understand and you like to predict that have to do with communication, because that's what our class is, communication. Okay, so go ahead and just write in the chat, what are some things that you like to understand and predict about, some situations that are communication? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Anyone has just one item, one situation that you like to understand or predict? Anything? Okay, arguments. Okay, trying to fully understand what's being said and how to respond to it. Very good. And a lot of us also want to learn how to be successful in arguments, right? So we might want to look at some strategies that will work to help us to be more effective, right? What else besides arguments? How about dating? Raise your hand. You can use the little hand raising thing if you like to be able to understand and predict dating better, okay? By a show of hands, how many people like to understand that and predict it? Okay, only one person? All right, I see three people now. Okay, so typically people want to do that. Another situation people want to understand and predict is job interviews, right? We want to understand them because we want to get hired. Okay, we want to understand our bosses so that we can do what we need to do to keep our jobs or maybe get promoted or get raises. Our families. Oh, there's a lot of stress and conflict in families. People want to understand that better, and people want to make relationships more effective in families, dating, at work, friendships, all these things, right? So the whole reason we do research is try to understand and try to be able to make predictions so that we can then make choices about how to interact with people that are going to be more effective. Okay, so that little news clip I showed you was an example of some research where this was done by scientists in a lab to actually analyze what was in those nuggets. Okay, so communication researchers do something similar. We try to understand what's going on by looking at it very closely and breaking things down and looking at the ingredients of communication. That's what we do. Now, I'll go back to share screen. Here is our slideshow. Oh, I have to press this button. Okay, so we're trying to understand and we're trying to predict our communication with others. All right, now our understandings are often based on sources of secondhand knowledge, and some of these two of the big categories of these sources is by tradition and by authority. So for tradition, your culture may tell you certain things are right and certain things are wrong, right? So in some Jewish cultures, you're not supposed to eat pork. It's considered unclean, and your tradition tells you don't eat pork, right? Nowadays, we might rely more on authority, and so people have done research into pork, and they're part of the reason why that pork could have been dangerous way back when is because pigs get a disease called trichinosis. And if you don't cook the pork properly, it can pass on to humans, right? So the tradition from the religion is don't eat pork. So that's one way of knowing you shouldn't eat that. But then in modern times, scientists have seen that that pigs get trichinosis, and if people don't cook it properly. So that's another source of information, is through an authority, what scientists tell you, right? But now what they say is not that you can't eat it, unless they're promoters of vegetarianism or veganism, which, that's a whole other area of research and discussion, and a lot of people are changing their diets. But what we learned when I was a kid was you have to cook it really, really thoroughly, because then if there is any trichinosis, it'll kill it. Okay, so authority from scientists and from doctors versus from tradition, like religion or what your family tells you have to do. Okay, so so those can be really, really very strong sources of knowledge that people believe in. And I'll give you an example of how those kind of things can change. Okay, so in some religions, it's against a religion to have an intimate relationship or get married to someone of the same gender, right? So that's just in the tradition, and some people are still very, very opposed to this because of those religious traditions, and that became cultural traditions. In the 19th century, scientists started doing research on LGBT people and started coming up with some false science that was saying that these people were sick, and that they have mental illnesses and so on. Okay, so that was then the medical profession that was making this determination. Over time, as better research started getting done, starting in the 50s, there was research that came out that said, hey, you know what? LGBT people, they don't have 80 more mental illnesses than heterosexual people. So this just basically isn't true. And so with that scientific information, that the designation of people who are LGBT as mentally ill got taken out of the diagnostic and statistical manual that psychologists and psychiatrists use to designate what constitutes a mental illness. So in 1973, it was taken out of that statistical manual, and it was just seen as a normal variation, right? But we still have people that are sticking to the tradition and not listening to what the authorities, the scientists, are telling us. Okay, and throughout the world, there's different opinions on it. Lots of people are changing in accord with what the authorities are saying, and contemporary authorities based on science and then based on direct experiences. A lot of people have changed their opinions about LGBT people because of their direct experience. Okay, their observations, they're getting to know people. Okay, that might be breaking with the tradition that you were raised with, and then the authority has really helped, and that's what's helped change the laws, so that in the United States, you are actually now allowed to marry a person of the same gender, which that used to be not the case, right? So we could look at a lot of different things and how people will rely on tradition, and people will rely on authority. Now, who constitutes an authority? Well, that differs sometimes from person to person, or family to family, community to community, right? So people who value education are going to look up to what scientists say, and look to what researchers say, and look to what people who are in charge of, say, the CDC and people like that, they'll look to those people as authorities. For legal issues, you would look to a lawyer as an authority, right? For your medical issues, you look to a doctor as an authority. And for schooling, you might look to teachers. For education, for your careers, the people who have been it, who are experts, who have higher levels of at a higher level in an organization, could be an authority, right? And hopefully, if you have good bosses that know what they're doing, that they could be an authority. So those are examples, and I think you could probably come up with more examples of people who you view as authorities on different subjects, right? Unfortunately, because we live in this media saturated celebrity culture, a lot of people are looking to celebrities as authorities and think that because you've achieved celebrity status that somehow makes you an authority. Now, if you are speaking, so for example, if an actor was speaking about how to become a better actor, then I would believe that person. But is that the person that I want to believe about my health issues, about political issues, about things that are just totally outside of their areas of expertise? Well, I would question that. So we have to be careful because sometimes popularity gets people to listen to them. And we've elected actors. Okay, we elected 2 actors to the presidency, right? From television shows. So, or from Reagan was in the movies, and Trump had a very popular television show, and that's how he got to be so popular. So you have to be careful because we want to make sure that when we view somebody as an authority, that they actually have the expertise in the area for which we are trying to learn and get information about. Okay, so those are some ways that we get information from tradition, or we get knowledge from information and from authorities. Okay, and that's how we answer our questions sometimes. Okay, now there we go. Okay, so here's some errors in the ordinary ways of inquiry when it's not done by researchers and scientists. Okay, so there can be inaccurate observation. So part of the reason I showed you the McNugget and that was cut in half is to see that, well, to the ordinary eye, for someone who doesn't know, that looks like white breast meat, right, from a chicken, but actually it's not. It's all different parts of the chicken and additives, right? So our observations can be inaccurate, and whenever we look at any situation, we can't see all the different angles of it. So that's another reason why our observations can be inaccurate. Okay, and you may have heard about where you get eyewitnesses at an accident, and if you interview 10 different witnesses, you'll get 10 different stories about what happened, because everybody's got their filters and are looking at it in a different way. Okay, now another problem that's common for ordinary people is to engage in overgeneralization. So an example of that is you were trying to get to work and you kept hitting stoplights, and so you make this overgeneralization that, I have to stop at every single stoplight. It's ridiculous how I am always the victim of stoplights. There's just always a stoplight when I'm trying to get anywhere. Well, what do you know about stoplights? Let's stop and talk about this a little bit here, okay? So, do stoplights target specific people? How do stoplights operate?
Is it just like a timer system or like based on the traffic? I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's just a timer. There's a timer in there that designates, I think that then if it's got one of those buttons that you press for the walking, I think that it will trigger the light to stop, because sometimes they're set up so they won't move unless they won't let you walk unless you press the button. But they still keep on the timer for the streets going the east, west, and north, south, right? They're on a timer. Okay. There's not some device that's like a drone following a person around and making the lights turn red every time they get to a red light, right? But that's just an example, right, of people overgeneralizing situations. And that kind of overgeneralization can happen because of something dramatic happening in your life. So, for example, a friend of mine got attacked getting into her car last Friday in Culver City. She went to this street, I can't remember if it's Washington or Culver, that has a lot of restaurants, and it's all lit up, and there's bright neon lights, and people are walking around and all very in good moods. And the restaurants aren't cheap, but they're they're not outrageous, but it's more expensive than fast food. Some of them are more expensive than others, right? So it's a very popular street. It's very busy on the weekends. So she went there to meet a friend, and then she went down one of the side streets, the street that's all lit up in bright lights and so on. There's side streets that feed into it, and she parked on a side street. So she opened the door to her car, and this guy grabbed her from behind and yelled at her, "Give me your money, give me your money." So she was trying to push him away with her left hand. And then she went into fighter mode, and she just said, "I don't have any, I don't have any." And she was trying to like pull away and push him away. And he grabbed her fingers and started pulling her fingers apart and hurting her. And then she had the presence of mind to stick her right hand on the horn. She laid her hand down on the horn really hard, and the horn just was beeping nonstop. And the guy apparently got nervous or scared, and he took off. And this getaway car pulled up, picked him up, and they ran off. So she was pretty shaken up, and now she thinks that it's a terribly dangerous world that we live in. And she went out on Saturday and bought a handgun and went out to the shooting range on Sunday to learn how to shoot a gun, because now her perception is that it's just too dangerous. Okay. So she's lived all these years and she's never been attacked. But now that she's been attacked, she perceives the world as a really dangerous place. And she's going to, her intention, I don't know if she's going to follow through, because maybe when she calms down, when her nervous system calms down, she'll rethink it. But her intention is now to have a hidden gun. I forgot what you call that, but you have like a shoulder harness and you have a gun hidden under your shirt. And then you could just pull the trigger without even pulling it out, right? So she's going to start doing that because she perceives the world as a dangerous place now. She got attacked, and now she thinks that she could get attacked anytime, anywhere. So the statistics are that the world is not that much more dangerous, but some of the events that we're seeing are very dramatic and very horrifying. So, for example, the mass shootings, and they can happen anywhere. So I think that violence is more random. But we also know that a lot of the mass shootings, a study just came out yesterday that said that a major reason for all these mass shootings is mental health problems and the lack of mental health support and services in this country. We're not dealing with it, and people not responding to early warning signs that people are dangerous. So people will frequently make threats and do things that are pretty violent or threatening, and people don't do anything about it to address it before it escalates to the point where they start killing people, right? So we know some of those factors, but it does give you this perception that the world's a more dangerous place. But if you look at the actual statistics, there's not that much of an increase in crime, and sometimes it goes up and down. And I sometimes look at FBI crime statistics or local statistics for where I'm living to see, how dangerous or how safe it is, right? So all cities have dangers, but another friend of mine, her husband was attacked in the country in Crescent City. They lived in the woods in a cabin, and someone that lived on that same street, and the houses were really, really spread apart, and you'd think you'd feel really, really safe up in the country in a rural area. And my friend's husband was kidnapped at 2 a.m. Someone broke into their house with a gun, and I think they didn't even lock the door because that's how safe they felt. And my friend's husband woke up and went out to see who was there, and the guy wanted money, and he said, "I'm sorry, I don't have any money, but I can take you to I have $200 in my bank, and I could take you to my teller machine and give you $200. So could you please do that, and let's just get out of the house," because he wanted to keep his family safe. So he did that. He went to the bank, he gave him the $200, and then the guy threw him in the trunk of his car. And he was trying to talk him out of doing that, said, "Listen, you don't want to do that. This is a felony. You're going to get in so much trouble," and so on. And the guy just didn't listen to him and threw him in the trunk, slammed it shut, and started driving. And when he stopped to get gas, my friend's husband was pounding on the roof of the trunk, and the the gas station attendant heard him and called the police. And but can you imagine, a lot of times the gas station attendant can't even hear you because they're inside and they've got these big, huge glass windows and they don't even know what's going on outside. But fortunately, he heard him and he reported it, and he was rescued by the police. Okay, so even living in the country doesn't guarantee that you're safe. There's been school shootings in the countryside and other countries. I mean, there's just random violence. So are we always at danger? You know, a lot of people would tell you no, but the problem is that it's the randomness of it that makes the world so scary. So we start generalizing that this happens all the time. That's all the time. Okay, so that's another type of generalization. And then the kinds of events that happen to people and the very, very dramatic stories that come from people who have been victims, they intensify this perception that it's just a constant thing, and we overgeneralize to how dangerous places are. But I do think we have to be very cautious no matter where we live in this world, because of those reasons that I articulated. Like there's just a lot of mental illness and a lot of randomness of the violence, and sadly, the more wealth inequality there is, you know, we have people that are super wealthy and people down here struggling to make it. The more people are struggling, that does increase crime. So you have to be careful, okay? But to overgeneralize and think that you're always at risk, that's just not true. Okay, so according to the research, but I understand that if you've been attacked, you're going to feel like that's the case. All right, so get back to the screen here and the slides. Look at some other problems here. Okay, so we have inaccurate observations and overgeneralizations. Okay, another thing is selective observation. So if you're if you I know it's a really good example when you buy a new car, and then when you're driving around, you're noticing your car all the time. Whereas before you bought that car, you never even noticed it. and then suddenly you're seeing the car that you bought everywhere. And I joke about it, you know, with people in my car and say, oh, there's my cousin over there. There's my sister, if there's the same color, you know, and things like that. So we tend to see things, we get primed to see certain things, things that we're familiar with. And then we also will look at things that really stand out, and we'll notice those things more than they will the ordinary everyday things, because we're so used to seeing them that we don't notice, right? So we can't see everything, and then we just select certain types of things depending on how, you know, what our mood is, what it is that we're looking for, and so on. So we can't see everything there is to see, all right? And then the last problem with it is that there's illogical reasoning. And there was a really good example of this in another book that I read, that was called How Real is Real. And there was a time up in Seattle that people were, somehow it got in the newspapers that people's windshields were getting pitted. So if you've had a car for a while, you will probably notice that the windshield gets pitted just from everyday wear and tear, right? That's what happens because rocks hit your window. Okay, so we already then a rumor got started that we were being hit by asteroids, and people actually thought that what was pitting their windows was little pieces of asteroids that were hitting our windscreens. So that's illogical reasoning, but people will do that. They will make up reasons for things that are happening that are not logical, but because perhaps somebody that they believed, that they trusted, that they thought was credible, told them something, they will think that, or they'll just use faulty reasoning processes. Like they won't look at evidence, they won't make comparisons to things that are comparable, and they'll come up with the wrong conclusion. So that's another problem, is that sometimes there's illogical reasoning that happens. Okay, so these are the types of errors in ordinary, everyday kinds of inquiry, investigations, efforts to understand what's going on, right? These are just everyday kinds of errors, ordinary errors that happen with people, okay? Now, the difference between ordinary investigation and the everyday kind of investigations are that people are trying to guard against the errors of ordinary human inquiry through a method. And the characteristics of the method is that, one, it's very careful, and two, it's very deliberate. So you're trying to include all the data that's relevant, and you're going through steps that you've set up. There's a process for it that we're going to be learning in this class. So it's deliberate, and you make sure you have accomplished every single step in the process, and you do it carefully. And so that's different than how we think ordinarily, which is to just, not spend a lot of time thinking about what's the best way to answer this question, what's the best data we can collect, what's the best method for collecting data, and so on, right? We don't think about it. It's just stuff that randomly comes to us, and we make these deliberations. But in science, you're very careful and you're very deliberate. You have a specific method. Okay. Okay, so the ways that people do research will depend on their view of reality, and there are different views, competing views of reality. The first one, the pre-modern view, it tends to be more rigid and dogmatic and authoritarian, and it wasn't necessarily based on empirical evidence. So a really good example of that was that people got in Salem, Massachusetts, people got accused of being witches, and then they would get burnt at the stake because they believed in that. Now, what was the proof for it? There really wasn't any good proof. But basically, if women did things that that people thought were going against the norm of how women should behave, they could be accused of witchcraft. And there was a small percentage of men; it was mostly women. The same thing in medieval Europe, when during the Inquisition, that 90% of the people burnt at the stake were women, and it's women who violated the norms for women's behavior, and then only 10% of men. Okay, so pre-modern, you have trying to understand things that doesn't have a rigorous empirical method for trying to understand it. And another example is when people get sick in some cultures, that it's assumed that they've been possessed by a demon and you have to expel the demon, right? So it's not empirical. It's just a belief that got passed down, and through tradition and through the authorities of that culture, that's what people would think in the pre-modern view that wasn't based on evidence. Okay. In the modern view, this is the age of reason and the age of science, that in the modern view, we believe that there is an objective reality out there, and that the objective reality can be discovered if we use the correct methods. The problem is sometimes finding what are the correct methods and getting the right data to determine what's real. And that's what science is built upon, and that's what a lot of our research and communications is based on, this view that we can discover things that are true, things that are real. And then you have something that's called the postmodern view, which is also a view that's being used today. And there's some research being done from a postmodernist perspective. The postmodern view is that we don't know objective reality. What we know is our social constructions of that reality, that everything that we think we know is something that human beings made up, and that even the scientific enterprise is just a bunch of methods that human beings made up. So there is no objective reality. It's just something people are creating. And an example of how that postmodern view has become a big influence on our society is in a new phenomenon of people not wanting to be classified into any gender. There's people who identify as non-binary. They aren't male and they aren't female, and they don't want to be put in a box. And a lot of those people believe that gender is a social construct, and so therefore it's not real, and they shouldn't be classified into one of those categories that they didn't choose, that other people chose for them. And some people are, undergoing surgeries to reinforce that, and some people are just changing their names, they're dressing the way they want to, and some people want to be ambiguous and they don't want anybody knowing if they are male or female, because they don't believe that that's really real. Okay, so those are the three different views. So postmodern research tries to look at how people are constructing their reality. So there is quite a bit of gender research from the postmodern perspective, how people are constructing reality, but you'll even find organizational communication research and media research that uses a postmodern view. It's trying to look at how people are creating social realities in the workplace, in organizations, in political speeches, and all kinds of communication phenomena. Postmodernists will look at the different ways that things are getting constructed, and they will often talk about how there are these competing views of reality. And the best example I think we have is if we look at the differences in political discourses. We have conservative and liberals, and they see the world in different ways, and each one thinks that theirs is the true, correct way to think. So people that are analyzing political discourses will look at how each of them are constructing their different views. And people look at media, they look at, how the news is constructing our realities. They'll look at how radio, television, film, how all these different things are constructing them. Okay. So these are the different views of reality and the different views. So out of these three views, the only views where you're going to see research is from the modernist view, the modern view, and then the postmodern view. Okay. And now we're going to look at the characteristics of scientific inquiry. Okay. So the first is that that people that do research, they do have a theory that they believe is useful, and they will then set up their study according to the theoretical framework that they're using. Okay, so based on that theory, then there's going to be specific methods that they use in order to collect the data. So the data is collecting the facts, right? Whatever it is you're studying, the data. And then based on their theory and the method of collecting the data, then there will be a method for data analysis. Okay. And then, so these three things, knowing your theory, collecting data, and then analyzing, it's really the heart of the scientific or empirical research process. That's what we do. That's what we're going to be learning to do this semester. And it's called empirical because what you're doing is trying to make claims based on evidence, what you can find out there to say that this is true. And the empirical research has different ways of collecting that data. So you could be interviewing people, you could be administering surveys, you could observe people. When people come to laboratories, they interact, and there are scientists that watch them interact. You could go on site and watch people interact if you're doing participant observation. Some discourse analysts, they make audio tapes of people talking, and then they analyze the transcript of the talk. So that's the data that they're using. But all of them have data that they've collected in this world that we live in. They're collecting that data and they're analyzing it. So the fact that they're taking actual data and analyzing it is what makes it an empirical enterprise. Okay, so it's based on observed kinds of phenomena. Okay, and scientific inquiry examines social regularities. So what we do is we look for patterns, and with those patterns, then we create categories. And if it's scientific, a lot of quantitative research, we're often also trying to make predictions. So we collect this data and we analyze it, try to understand what's going on, to try to make predictions about how to make interactions go according to the goals that we set up. Okay, so for example, I teach public speaking, and many people feel anxious. Okay, 70% of the population has some kind of communication apprehension, which is the fear of communicating. So in public speaking, it's 70% that people feel that communication apprehension. So I've looked at empirical research for how people can reduce that fear. So when I teach public speaking, one of the things that I do is try to help my students feel less fear and get more focused on what they're talking about. So I rely on that research. So they've found different ways that people can manage the fear, and they look at the patterns in the different approaches that are taken to help people try to lessen their fear. So one of the studies that I read found that if students were to practice their speech 5 times in front of an audience of 5 people, so you could collect a group of friends or your family or your classmates and do your speech 5 times and get feedback from those people 5 times, you will lower that fear by 50% just by doing that, right? So that's done by doing this experiment with and comparing the students who have done those rehearsals, the 5 rehearsals, versus the students that didn't do it, and finding that with the people that did do it, that they were 50% less nervous than the people who didn't prepare that way, right? So you would get hundreds of people in that study. If you did it on just one class where you had, 15 people who did and 15 people who didn't, right? That wouldn't be a very reliable study because you can't generalize it to a bigger population. That's such a small group of people, right? So you have to get hundreds to thousands of people for social scientific studies that are going to make generalizations and try to establish some facts that people could use to make predictions about what they can do in their social interactions. Okay, so then the last thing is that scientific inquiry examines aggregates rather than individuals. Okay, so an aggregate is a collection of numerous people, whereas an individual is just one person. The exception to that is, I know that in psychology and sometimes in other areas, right, you might do a case study of just one person. So Freud, for example, he wrote case studies about his patients, and he would just write about one person, but then he would collect the different case studies and look at the aggregate of these different people with similar types of symptoms and create a category for that, right? So that would be the aggregate, not just the one patient, but pulling it together with the others and then creating categories, different categories of mental illness is what that did. Okay, so for communication as well, we would look at a group, or we might study a group, we might study a bunch of students in different classes, and typically we will try to get data from multiple sources and not just one source. Okay, so if I wanted to do a study about college students, I would try to collect data from 2 or 3 universities and not just one university. Okay, so we'll talk more about how you decide where to collect your data and how much data to collect, and we'll be talking about that when we look at research methods and when we look at something that's called sampling. But just for right now, what's important to know is that we typically do not just study one person for a research project. We would look at multiple people. So we would look at aggregates, groupings of people, as opposed to just an individual. Okay. Okay. So what I just said is true for a lot of social scientific study. Now we're going to talk specifically about communication studies. So communication studies is a field of research that studies the production and the uses of symbols, both linguistic and nonverbal. A symbol is something that stands for something else. Okay, so if I want to communicate about a dog, I use the word dog. I could write it down, D-O-G. I could take a picture of it and show you a picture of it, right? But to communicate about dog, I don't have to take the dog and throw it at you, right? I use a symbol of the dog to communicate. And then we have complex, rich communication. So we use lots and lots of symbols when we talk about something. And that's what communication people research, are these symbols. So it could be words, it could be written words, it could be stuff that's on a video, it could be stuff that's in an audio recording. You could study, literally you could study billboards. Okay, so that's written text. So different ways that people communicate use symbols, and that's one of the defining features of being a human, is that we use symbols. And the symbols could be linguistic and nonverbal. So linguistic is the use of words, and nonverbal is looking at body language, facial expressions, gestures. And then it could also be things like pictures. It could be posters. It could be movies, and you know, and it could be songs. It could be anything because of the music and the sounds of it. So all of these things are things that human communication researchers study. Okay, then we have both mediated and face-to-face. So mediated means that it's coming through a channel like a text message, a cell phone, a computer, a TV, a radio. These are all mediated communication channels. And face-to-face is two people that are engaging typically in the same space and the same location, so they can actually see each other. That's face-to-face communication. So face-to-face could be a conversation at a coffee shop. Face-to-face could be a teacher talking to a group of students, or the president of the university talking to the whole campus at a big event like graduation, right? That's all face-to-face communication. And then we study concrete social situations or contexts. So we study things that are actually happening as opposed to things that are hypothetical. And then the reason we do it is to enable the dynamics of systems, society, and culture, right? So we want to try to give information that helps with the functioning. So a system is a collection of different parts or different individuals, right? So the university is a system. It consists of students, teachers, administrators, janitors, different kinds of support people, right? These are all different systems, different parts of the system. And then we have, that's like the individuals in it. And then we have different departments. So we have communication studies, we have math, we have the administration, right? We have the dean's office, we have student government, right? These are all parts of a system. So communication scholars can look at dynamics of systems, and that's one of the things that organizational communication scholars look at, and sometimes also media scholars. Health comm, you could be looking at the health system. The environmental comm people could be looking at the different entities that interact with environmental decisions and conflict, okay? Sometimes communication scholars look at society as a whole, so they'll look at different parts of society. And then we also look at the level of culture. So we will look at how people behave in specific cultures, or what the values, the norms, the communication style, the different features of different cultures. So those are the kinds of things that communication researchers look at, and we'll be looking at more detail about this. And this is directly, these are the actual words in the your textbook, the Leslie Baxter and Earl Babby textbook that I copied out of there, okay, for you to think about, because these are important, okay? Now, all right, so communication is the primary focus of our studies, and we study the process of message production. So how are people writing scripts? How are people writing speeches? How do people figure out what to say when they're going on a first date? How do people manage a conflict? Okay, so what are the things that you're actually saying and doing that when you're creating those things, those ideas, those words, those actions, right? That's message production, okay? The transmission is sending it, so actually speaking it or sending it through the internet, okay? And then we have the meaning making. So how are people interpreting what's being said to them? What are they understanding? That's the interpretation side. So communication researchers could be studying any one of these or all of these together. That's what we study. And we study the content and the form of communicative messages. So the content are the words themselves, okay? And the form is how you say it. How do you put it across? Am I talking really quietly, or am I talking really loud, and am I being really animated? Okay, so that's the form of the communication. And then we study the function. So what's the reason we're doing this? What are we trying to accomplish? That's the function, how it works. And then what's the effect of it? So what effect do the messages have on people? What effect does the different teaching methods have on you in the classroom? What effect does the news have on people's understanding of the world and their behavior? What effect does advertising have? And so on. What effect do managers have on their employees? Okay, what effect do children have on their parents, and what effect do parents have on their children? These are all things that you can study in communication, and of course there's much more. All right. Now, once the communication research is completed, people want to share that information. That's the main reason we do it. We don't do it just for ourselves. We do it so that we can share it with other people with different communities, okay? So if you're a researcher in a public institution, or even some private institutions like a private university, if you work for a university, you are typically trying to get your research published in journals, and you might also write a book. And these are intended for public consumption, so people can have that information. And our goal when we are researchers in universities is to add to the knowledge, to the pool of knowledge that people have. So you always want your research to contribute. And if you don't contribute something new, it won't get published. And it's very competitive. We'll talk about this later, but it's not easy to get your research published in a journal. It's actually challenging. So you have to do a really good job. Okay, so that's one way that people make a living, is to work for a university or a research institute that's for the public good. Okay, another way that people make a living as researchers is to work for private entities. And so there's corporations that hire researchers, and some corporations even have researchers that are employees that do research. So this research is not meant for the public. It's meant for the use of the sponsor, whoever's paying for the research. So those sponsors could be corporations, they could be individuals, it could be a nonprofit organization. Government research is interesting because some of it is going to be for the public, and they put it on websites so people can have more information. You know, like the CDC was putting out so much stuff with the COVID virus, and it still is, right, for public consumption. They weren't trying to make a profit off of that research, but they were trying to further the knowledge. But sometimes government research is public, but sometimes it's private for particular entities in the government to get information to understand how things works and how to get things done more effectively. So these are the different things. So if you like this class and you were thinking you might like to be a researcher, you could become a researcher by becoming a professor at a university. Some big research universities, so all the UCs are research universities. So UCLA, UC Berkeley, UC San Diego, UC Davis, all those UCs, UC Riverside, one of the big parts of their mission is to produce research. That's what they exist for. So if you like doing this and you wanted to be a professor, you would have to go to a big research institute, which has a PhD program. Okay, so that's in California, the UCs, and then there's quite a few private ones, depending on what you wanted to study. They're a lot more expensive, but they're easier to get into. So that's one career path for people that want to do research, is to become a professor or a researcher. So at UCLA, for example, I have a friend who we were in a statistics class together at San Francisco State when I was getting my master's, and now she's a full-time researcher for UCLA, but she does not teach. She's not a professor. She just goes in every day and does research. So research universities hire both researchers and professors do both. And they also share their knowledge in classes, so I'm sharing knowledge with you right now that's based on research. Okay, so those are some career paths, and ways that research gets used. And another way that it can be used is to try to develop a program. So, for example, right now in our department, there's some people doing what's called a feasibility study to have another major that's in communication that's focused on media production. So people that want to go into being influencers, people that want to work in radio, television, film, all those kinds of things, right? We're thinking about it, but we don't know if we're going to do it yet because right now we're just exploring it. So we have some professors that are doing a feasibility study, right? So that's not for public consumption. That's for us to determine if this is a good idea, and to also, if it is a good idea, to try to sell that to the administrators to start another focus in communication studies so we can attract more students. And as you know, we've had a 42% decline of enrollment. So we're trying to think of ways to get more people in there. So this is a very practical problem. It's a practical problem that affects you because it affects how many classes that you may be able to sign up for. If, you know, we had cuts and I have students that couldn't get their classes and have to go to school an extra semester now because they were seniors because of the cuts, right? So this is something that really affects you. So that's the kind of research that could be done. Is it could be for immediate use, right? Or it could be used to create knowledge to put into these books and journal articles so that everybody could have access to this information. And then it could be used privately to make decisions for organizations about what they ought to be doing, okay? So, so that's the whole presentation. And I want to stop now and see if you have any questions about any of this. Any questions at all? Okay, so by a show of hands, how many people feel that they understood everything that I said today and they have a better understanding of communication? So you can go ahead and just do that little hand thing. How many people think they got more clarity today? So let's see. Okay. Okay, oh, I even got some applause. That's good. I'm glad. More than just understanding, you appreciated it. Okay, that's great. Okay. So I know sometimes people take breaks, so some people might not have indicated, because I know I've done that when I'm at a Zoom meeting, is run to the bathroom or get a drink or something. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a better understanding. So today I'm going to post this chapter, that the material, you'll also find the material in the chapter so that you can review it. And the quiz will be due on Tuesday. That's on this chapter. And then on Tuesday, we'll be doing some activities in class. And you'll have a homework assignment that has to do with research and finding the kinds of research we do in communication. So you'll have a homework assignment to look up some research, and then we're going to be talking about it and using what you find out in class on Tuesday. All right. So I will stay here for as long as anybody wants to stick around if you have any questions for me. And if you don't have any questions, then you're free to leave. And I hope you have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Okay. So take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you for coming. Okay.